Welcome to the Shootin' Show. Stand by for shots fired.
Hello, I'm Johnny Rowland, and welcome again to this week's Shootin' Show. We have some great features for you this week. We have some guns we're going to test I think a lot of you are going to find interesting. Please remember, we hear from a lot of people all over the country. We are still free to local TV stations and local cable companies. So if you have any trouble with when you may talk to your local cable company, well, have them call us in Shreveport, area 318-222-8515. So without further ado, as I like to say, let's let another Shootin' Show begin. Now, friends, a gun we're going to look at today is one that personally I haven't seen for a while. This little revolver is a Colt Cobra. Now, the Cobra was built on the Detective Special design and frame, with one exception. And of course, we know it's empty. Now, you know me. I'm going to be down here. We're going to handle unloaded guns. And you'll notice I have my eye protection in place, and I've already got my hearing protection in case we want to shoot this in a minute, which we will. But the Colt Cobra is a 6-shot revolver, double action revolver. It has a standard Colt operating feature of the cylinder release is on the left side of the gun looking from the rear, and instead of like on the Smith & Wesson, on the Colt system you'll pull the latch back to release the cylinder. But these are very fine little guns. Again, they haven't been in production for a while. The Cobra has an alloy frame. Now this one is nickel plated, and it has what appear to be Colt / Packmeyer grips, which are in fact extremely comfortable on the little gun. And I was so sorry, along with a lot of other people, we were so sorry that these guns went out of production several years ago. Now the good news is that Colt is coming back into regular production with the D-frame, such as the Detective Special. These guns will be back in production, and in fact they may be shipping even at this time. I'm not sure, but I'm sure it'll be soon. But the Colt Cobra, when you can find one of these guns, they're very highly desirable. One, they're so light. They're an excellent backup gun. You can put it in a small holster. They're easily concealed, and you forget they're there because they are so light. I'm going to guess that this gun certainly weighs under 20 ounces. It's extremely comfortable in the hand, the way the design is here. And one advantage that the Colt guns have, especially like on the Detective Special series, they hold 6 instead of 5. On the Smith & Wesson Chief Special, which is a very fine little gun, they hold normally 5 in 38 Special chambering. That's what this gun is. It's a 38 Special. And many other little guns about this size are 5 shooters instead of 6. But that's one advantage that these little Colt guns had, was they held 6 shells. Now with the alloy frame, I don't think that I would put the hot ammunition in it. Now possibly you could get away with some ammunition such as this PMC 125 grain jacketed hollow point. It is a plus P loading, and these guns, if my understanding is correct, was not rated for plus P with the alloy frame. That's something that we could all bear a little researching on, but I wouldn't recommend shooting, certainly not for fun, the plus P ammunition. Rather, if you're going out and plink and practice with the gun, why not use a target wad cutter, which is very mild on the gun. It's certainly accurate enough for our purposes of learning to shoot it, or a standard velocity 38 Special rather than a plus P. The pressures aren't nearly as much, and as I understand, now I've never heard of one of these little guns like this Colt. I've never heard of one, shall we say, blowing up or tearing up. But as I understand what will happen, the alloy frames under great pressure have a tendency to stretch a little bit in the window here, in the cylinder window, the frame window, and that's the only problems that I've really heard from. And frame stretching can deteriorate on the gun's functioning. But anyway, so today we're going to shoot some standard velocity 38 Specials in this little gun. And again, when you can find one, of course, because they've been out of production, they're not inexpensive, but hopefully Colt will come back in production with this as a regular item. This would be an excellent gun for a woman to carry in her purse, an excellent car gun because it is so light and easy to handle. You have a little bit more recoil, of course, than a steel frame model, but the Colt Cobra was such an excellent series, And why they went out of production originally, I have no idea, because my impression was that they literally sold every one of these guns they could make. You have your standard features. You have an automatic hammer safety, and we know the gun's empty. When you cycle the hammer down as if in firing and you release the trigger, the hammer automatically comes back. It has a hammer block. So they are safe to be carried with 6 rounds in the cylinder. Well, let's shoot the gun for just a moment and let you look at recoil-wise on just how it looks. All right, friends, let's watch the recoil with your standard wad cutters, 148 grain hollow base wad cutters, and let's see what it looks like. I don't think you're going to see much reaction. And you'll see it just didn't have much recoil at all. Now, friends, this little Colt Cobra is primarily designed as a close-range defensive gun. However, let me mention to you that it would be a great gun to take along on a fishing trip. With snake shot in it, it would certainly be adequate at close range to fend those vicious snakes off. And I read where Bob Millick said the other day he got a lot of letters from people that liked rattlesnakes. He wrote up in one of his recent columns about he shot every rattlesnake that he saw. Well, I agree with him. The people who, the ecologically speaking, people who don't understand why we shoot snakes, well, they just need to spend a little more time outdoors and need to walk around in the country at night around their house and stumble on one. And trust me on this one, I think their attitude would be a little different. Anyway, no criticism implied. Well, let's shoot our Colt Cobra on paper here. And again, it's a close-range defensive type gun, and you're going to see that you can rapidly shoot one of these little guns and accurately. The trigger action mechanism is real good. I think they had a lot of hand fitting on these guns. It's certainly smooth. So let's take a look on the paper. We'll put a couple of shots in the top ring, a couple in the middle, and a couple in the bottom ring. Let's see what it looks like. And that wasn't, in fact, didn't take too long at all. And our shots, of course, let's walk over to the target. And, of course, we've taken our cylinder out of the gun, and so we know it's safe. But, you know, those are pretty rapid shots. You have 2 in the top, 2 in the center, and 2 in the bottom. And really, that is more than adequate close range or defensive accuracy. So I think that this little gun could be extremely useful to many of us out there, even in a home defense application. If you're uncomfortable with a larger caliber, listen, the .38 is still a viable defensive caliber. Also good for small game hunting. And believe me, these little guns are accurate enough to use for that purpose. Now, friends, there's one other revolver shooting tip that I want to pass on to you. Again, we have a lot of people who are not familiar with firearms of any kind who are starting to watch our show. We reach into areas, it's sort of like the Starship Enterprise. We're going places that none of us as gun owners or shooters have ever been, in people's homes that don't know anything about guns. So one point I want to make about this Colt Cobra revolver, and for that matter, most other revolvers. You know, a number of these guns depend on the momentum that the cylinder will have to bring it up in proper alignment to shoot. So instead, and we know this gun is empty, we're going to cycle it here. We know it's empty. Take the cylinder out. Now let me show you something. Now, friends, on a double action revolver like this, the way we shoot a double action revolver to, again, help the gun function like it's supposed to, we will not pull the trigger real slow like so. We're going to pull the trigger evenly through like this. We're going to let that cylinder have some momentum so it will come up and lock in place. A lot of the guns, especially Colts, were made whereas they depend on the cylinder momentum for the cylinder to lock in place. And for that matter, a lot of other revolvers that maybe have a little wear on the hand or the little piece that pushes the cylinder in place, they need a little bit of speed for them to work. So again, a smooth pull through, like so, not ultra slow, just do it smooth so the gun can function properly. And that is how to properly shoot a double action. We don't do it in slow motion. Some people in certain disciplines tend to stage these guns. They'll pull the trigger part of the way, but I prefer to have a smooth, line your sights up, have a smooth pull through so that cylinder can go ahead and lock in like it's supposed to. Again, friends, this little Colt Cobra is a tremendous, lightweight, extremely carryable and concealable 38 special revolver. When you can find one of these in a used gun shop, or if you know someone that has one and wants to sell it, they really are very fine little guns to own and to enjoy shooting. And you know, we don't advocate breaking any law. We don't advocate breaking the law at all. But in a lot of areas around the country now, you can get concealed weapon permits. And this would be an excellent gun to use in a concealment situation. The Colt Cobra. Ladies and gentlemen, we're very privileged this afternoon. We're down on the range with Jim Clark Jr. And I'm very pleased to say that Jim is the new USPSA national champion in the 3-gun discipline with rifle, shotgun, and handgun. And we're so pleased. The Clarks have been great supporters of ours. We're very pleased to be associated with them. But also, they talk about a shooting family, huh, Jim?
Well, we were brought up on it, so that's our hobbies.
Well, Jim's going to give us some tips on several different guns, but right now I believe he's going to do a piece with a rifle for us.
Yeah, I'd like to go over one thing that, of course, most of our shots are either position or offhand, with a lot of shots being offhand. And one of the tips that we'd like to do for the offhand shooters, of course, is breaking the first shot. And one of the big problems is people want to move their head, or they get up and they can't find the scope or the dot, whichever you use, a scope or a red dot sight. Get your position. Now this, of course, is completely unpractical for hunting, or because you would never have this much time, but for a competition sense, get your sight picture, bring the gun down, and leave your head still. And when the buzzer goes off for your first shot, you're there.
Well, Jim, tell us now, what is your rifle? Now, obviously, this is some sort of AR-15 looking gun with a bipod on the front.
Yeah.
But what is your rifle? Tell us what it is.
Okay, this is an Eagle Arms AR-15 with a 1.5 to 5 Leopold scope, Harris bipod, aluminum forearm, the heavier barrel with a Clark muzzle brake.
Okay, now did your brother-in-law have something to do with this muzzle brake?
Yes, he invented it and I produce it. So that
okay.
I make the money on it and he gets the fame.
Well, whatever. Well, let me get out of the way, and Jim's going to show us some stuff here.
Jim, explain to us, if you would, how that muzzle brake works.
On the AR-15, of course, you're doing with a fairly high-velocity bullet. You'll see the 2 large ports are mainly for recoil from front to rear. Also have 2 top holes for the muzzle rise. With an AR-15, it's fairly easy to get the muzzle to go down if you make the top holes too large. What we're looking for is complete neutrality with where the muzzle doesn't move at all, of course, for rapid fire.
And you folks do sell that. If someone would like a muzzle brake fitted like that to their gun, which does make a difference on for speed shooting, shooting for time. Am I correct?
Yes, yes. All right, what I want to do is just show you that that one-shot draw. Everybody has about, I only know 2 or 3 people that have a really rapid rate of fire after the first shot, but a lot of people lose time on their first shot, hunting for the target, hunting for the scope. So let's see what it looks like on the clock. Now we're at about 40 yards here on an IPSC target, and I'm just going to do a one-shot draw. I'm going to get my head right. Earmuffs on. And one shot. Try it one more time. That was 86/100ths of a second. 91/100ths of a second. I can tell you just from what my sight picture was, those shots are probably about 1.5 inches apart in the A zone. So that really works by getting your head set, bringing the gun to port arms, and then don't move your head and just till the buzzer goes off. Just bring the gun right back. Works pretty good. It works as equally well for the pistol as the shotgun.
Well, you know, that's something I never really thought about before. Of course, that's why, one, you're a champion shooter, is you know all these things already.
Well, it's a little trick. It won't save you a lot of time, but if you've got 6 or 7 one-shot draws in a match, it adds up.
We'll have more from Jim Clark Jr. in just a moment after this break for your local cable company or television station.
All right, same position. Head in line, get comfortable. You got time. Leave your head still, bring the gun down. The buzzer goes off, the gun's in place. You can almost snap shoot the shot if you do it right, with a little practice. All right, what we're going to do here is go prone on a prone position. There's not many variations you can do on this. The only variation I know of is some people like to turn their Harris bipod around to the front, tie strings to it, turn it around to the rear, and flip their hands open. Personally, I like to go to the front and just grab onto the bipod and pull them both out when I go prone. Let's see what it looks like. Of course, that's going to be your steadiest position. With a Harris bipod, it's just like shooting off a bench.
Well, tell me something, Jim. What are the ranges that you would normally shoot in a rifle match or three-gun match with a rifle?
In an IPSC match, with the rifle, anywhere from 7 to normally 300 yards. And you never know what the course of fire is, so you have to be prepared at all ranges.
What sort of bullet or loading configuration do you like to use for your match guns?
It's a little different for every match. Normally I'm using a 52 or a 55 grain bullet. For the flat trajectory, the 69 shoot good too, but I just like the flat trajectory of the lighter bullet. What I'm going to do now is just a rapid fire sequence on one target, and for about 10 shots, and we'll see how long it takes. Even at that speed, with a good muzzle brake, good gun, you know where it's sighted in at, there's no problem keeping them in the A zone at this distance, especially on one target like that. It's fairly easy.
Now, friends, one of the advantages in dealing with Clark Custom Guns is they're not only gun builders, but they're also some of the finest competition shooters in the world today. That muzzle brake we were showing you earlier was designed by the great Jerry Michalik, who is, in fact, Jim's brother-in-law. Clark Custom Guns, Post Office Box 530, Keithville, Louisiana. Their zip code is 71047, or give them a call at area 318-925-0836.
It's fast. It's exciting. It's challenging. It's fun. This is the USPSA, United States Practical Shooting Association, the fastest growing sport in America today. If you'd like to become more proficient and confident with your firearm, meet new and interesting people, and compete with thousands around the world, join the USPSA. There's a local chapter near you.
Now, friends, recently we had the chance to go over to Dallas, Texas, and visit with Roy Jenks from Smith & Wesson, and we're at the Hall of State Museum, where the great Smith & Wesson historical collection is on display. Now, if you're going anywhere near Dallas or live anywhere in this area, believe me, it is really worth a trip. The Hall of State Museum is on the Texas State Fairgrounds. It's easy to get to off the interstates, so I think it'll be a trip well worth your while.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're here in Dallas this afternoon with a good friend of ours, Mr. Roy Jenks. He's the official historian from Smith & Wesson, and he's all the way down here from Massachusetts, and he has brought this fabulous Smith & Wesson historical collection. And Roy, why don't you tell us some of the things you folks are doing?
Well, what we're trying to do is to make people more aware of the history of firearms in America. The Connecticut Valley is a very important place in the history of firearms. It was in the valley at the Springfield Armory that the history of firearms really begins in America. Now, when I say that, I know there's a lot of other independent makers, but that's the mechanized manufacturing of firearms. Around the Springfield Armory grew over 350 different arms makers. One of those companies is Smith & Wesson. So we're here in conjunction with the Connecticut Valley Museum to put together an exhibit that will try to help people understand the full history of Smith & Wesson.
Well, I'm really glad to see it get down, and I say our part of the country because you're only about 250 miles or so from my house. And you have vast numbers of shooters and people who really wouldn't get a chance to see a lot of these things. And now, of course, it's going to be down here until when?
It's here till March 10th of '93, and from there it's going to go to Nashville, and it'll be in Nashville in times for the NRA show, so the people who come to the NRA show will be able to see it, and it'll be at the Tennessee State Museum in Nashville. From Nashville we'll go to Omaha, Nebraska, and then from Omaha to Cody, Wyoming, and then finally to the Carolinas, and then back to Springfield, Massachusetts before it goes overseas.
Well, that's great. Well, friends, I can't say a number of you who saw our piece this past year on this collection. Roy, in fact, is the fine gentleman who put that together in conjunction with Cass Paley, and we had a lot of response to that. We had a lot of people that called us and wrote us about that particular segment. So we're going to look at a few of those things today, and of course we've got the man himself here to tell us just a little bit about some of these terrific pieces. So Roy, we really appreciate you taking time to do this, and people are really going to enjoy this.
Well, Johnny, it's a real pleasure to be on your show, and I'm glad to do it, and it'll be fun to take you through the exhibit.
Great.
Well, Johnny, let's start here with case one, and start with meeting the two people who put the company together. We have Horace Smith, who was 17 years older than Daniel Baird Wesson. They began as independent gun makers. Horace Smith in Norwich, Connecticut, and he actually made the first of the muzzle-loading, repeating-style pistols. Here, the gun had two magazines, one that held bullets, the other held powder and primer. When you loaded this gun, you just simply rotated it up. The powder and the balls would drop into place. You'd drop it back, you'd pull it to full cock, and you were ready to fire the gun. D.B. Wesson started as an apprentice with his brother Edwin. And this is the first pistol that D.B. Wesson ever made. And he did that while he was an apprentice with his brother in 1843. After his brother died, D.B. Wesson went on to make his own muzzle-loading rifles. It was while both these people were independent gun makers that they met in Windsor, Vermont, producing different guns with the Robinson Lawrence Company. So let's move on and see what happens when they start their new partnership. In this next case is the first partnership that occurred between Smith & Wesson, the two men. Here they began business in 1852 in Norwich, Connecticut, and what they were producing was a lever-action repeating gun. These guns function very much like we know the lever-action Winchester. The gun had a lever, it was cocked, and as it was cocked, it brought a new cartridge in, that the cartridges were held in the tubular magazine here in the bottom. You could fire this gun as fast as you could pull the trigger. The problem with the gun was in its cartridge. It was a fully self-contained cartridge, but actually it was a hollow bullet that contained all the primer and the propellant. What happens is when the hammer would fall, sometimes it would push the cartridge too far up in the barrel without igniting it. Then a man would have to knock it out. The other problem was, since the cartridges were stacked against each other in the bottom with a pointed bullet against a mercury fulminate primer, and on occasion, on recoil, all the cartridges would go off, and you'd essentially have a bomb in your hand. To get around that, D.B. Wesson patented a new style cartridge. Today, we know that as a 22 rimfire. Unfortunately, they were unable to make that cartridge work in this gun. In 1856, when the company ran into financial problems, they sold its firm to Oliver Winchester. And Winchester, of course, took the company through a series of name changes, and in 1866 it emerges again as the famous Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Let's move on now to case 3 and see what happens with the Smith & Wesson partnership. After the failure of the first Smith & Wesson firm, Horace Smith moves back to Springfield, Massachusetts, and goes to work for his brother-in-law, Will Collins. D.B. Wesson stayed on to help Winchester get his company running smoothly. But while he was working for Winchester, D.B. Wesson designed and built a new gun, a small 7-shot revolver to fire the new 22 cartridge that he had made. This revolver was totally different. It was called a tip-up. The barrel tipped backwards, the cylinder was pulled out, and now you inserted the cartridges in here. And for the first time, America had a firearm that used a fully self-contained, waterproof cartridge. When D.B. Wesson went to patent his new revolver, he found out that the most important feature of a cartridge revolver, a cylinder being bored end for end to take the metallic cartridge, had already been covered in an earlier patent issued to Rowland White on April 3, 1855. On November 17, 1856, D.B. Wesson signed an agreement licensing himself and Horace Smith to manufacture under the Rowland White patent. And as you see here, we have the original Rowland White patent and Rowland White's patent model, which was for a percussion Colt. Now, White's design was totally impractical. It took a paper cartridge that loaded in this magazine, and when you operated the lever, it pushed a cartridge into the cylinder, which was bored end for end, rotated the cylinder, sheared the base of the paper cartridge off, and dropped a propellant in here, and the gun would fire. Unfortunately, it never worked. But it covered the most important feature that was necessary for the manufacture of a cartridge revolver, the bored-through cylinder. With the establishment of Smith & Wesson in Springfield on November 17, 1856, the company grew rapidly. Their first guns were tip-ups. They were very popular, but they didn't meet the need of the military, which would have been the largest market that D.B. Wesson and Horace Smith could have entered. They began in 1862 developing a military gun. The first one was this large rimfire that had a chain hanging off it. This had a loading gate where the cartridges were loaded through the rear, put in here, and you could fire it. This piece was the extractor. The chain prevented you from losing your extractor, so you'd always be able to get the cartridges out. They improved on it by making a smaller pocket model, a 4-shot. Unfortunately, that was not popular, and they only made about 30 of them. In 1870, Smith & Wesson developed the first of the large frame military-style pistols. This gun, called the Model 3, was made for the United States Army and served in the western frontier. If you look up here, you can see how these new guns worked. They were a top brake, and as the barrel was swung down, all the cartridges were automatically extracted at once, thus giving an individual the opportunity to load a gun very rapidly. One of the people that had seen the Smith & Wesson Model 3 was the Grand Duke Alexis of Russia, who had visited the Paris Exposition in 1867. He was so impressed with the various styles of Smith & Wesson that he had one of the new Smith & Wessons sent to Russia. Upon examining it and testing it, he decided that that was the gun that the Russian army needed to have. So in 1871, he gave Smith & Wesson their first contract for 20,000 Russian Smith & Wessons for the Russian army, and that is this model here. And if you look carefully at this picture, you can see that the Smith & Wessons that went to Russia carried the Cyrillic markings of the Russian government, and actually it says Smith & Wesson in Russian. Smith & Wesson, over the next 8 years, manufactured for the Russian government 3 different models of their Model 3. to meet the Russian needs. In total, we sold the Russians over 138,000 guns. That wasn't enough. They set up their own manufacturing facilities at Tula, their arms manufacturing industry, and between 1875 and 1900, they produced over 400,000 Smith & Wesson style revolvers.
Friends, we'll continue with the Smith & Wesson Museum Tour next week. Meanwhile, we're going to take a short break for your local television station or cable company. Now, friends, we're going to continue with the Smith & Wesson Museum Tour next week. And right now, we'd like to feature our good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Art Alpin, retired from the great A-Square Company, builders of some of the finest heavy game rifles in the world. A-Square, 1 Industrial Park, Bedford, Kentucky. The zip code is 40006. Their phone number is area 502-255-7456.
The period from 1885 through the start of World War I saw a flurry of activity throughout the industrialized world in the development of the infantry rifle. There were many competing designs, such as Mauser, Lee, Hotchkiss, Krag, Jorgensen, Lebel, Mannlicher, Viterli, Kropatschek, each with its own unique set of advantages and disadvantages. The adoption of any one particular design over another was as much caught up in questions of national pride as it was in superiority of design. Further, many of these designs went up dead-end streets as they were chambered for black powder cartridges, rimfire cartridges, had tubular magazines, or had some other problem. Some of these designs recovered from their problems and got back into the mainstream of development. Others never recovered and simply disappeared from the scene. Even worse, some of these weapons were adopted and issued by the nations involved before the design itself had reached its maximum potential. All of the designs we mentioned were basic variations of the turnbolt design, the idea for which came from the Mauser single-shot breech loader of 1871. By the start of World War I, almost all weapons that had been adopted were bolt action of one sort or another. They all used cartridges with smokeless powder and jacketed Spitzer bullets, and had some sort of integral magazine with charger loading. As a good generic representative of the bolt-action magazine rifle, we have picked the Pattern 17 Enfield. This rifle borrowed a little bit from the Lee, the Mauser, and a few other designs, and was to be, along with the new .276 Magnum cartridge, the British rifle for 1914. World War I put a stop to its issue. The tooling was transferred to the United States, and the rifle was made in .303 caliber for the British from 1915 until 1917, when we entered the war. The tooling was then converted to .30 caliber, and the rifle became general issue for U.S. forces in World War I. Most bolt actions were simple, yet robust.
In order to operate, the firer grasped the bolt handle and lifted it, thereby unlocking the bolt. He then drew the handle to the rear, thereby extracting the cartridge in the chamber, and at the rear of bolt movement, ejecting the cartridge out of the weapon. If the rifle was empty, then the follower in the magazine would rise, blocking forward motion of the bolt and telling the shooter that he needed to reload the weapon. The shooter then took his magazine charger, normally a disposable stripper clip holding 5 rounds of ammunition, and placed it in a corresponding notch milled into the receiver bridge. He pressed all 5 rounds downward with his thumb and then discarded the stripper clip. Forward motion of the bolt would then pick up the top round in the magazine, driving it forward into the chamber. Downward motion of the bolt would then lock the weapon. Depending upon design, at some point during the lifting of the bolt handle or the forward motion of the bolt, the cocking piece and firing pin would be cocked and held by the sear. Upon pressing the trigger, the sear was depressed, the firing pin released to go forward and fire the cartridge. The shooter then grasped the bolt handle, lifting it upward, and the cycle started all over again. All bolt-action magazine rifles had some sort of adjustable sights. The most common were like this Mauser, an open sight mounted on the barrel. Though it is ballistically a very good sight, it is actually difficult for the shooter to use. Of the various designs, the best was a peep or aperture sight mounted on the receiver bridge. This placed it close to the shooter's eye, had the longest sight radius, and was the easiest for the shooter to recover his sight picture after he took his face away from the stock in order to work the bolt. In the case of the P-17, this sight was adjustable to 1,600 yards. Normally, however, a shooter was only trained to estimate the range to the target and independently fire at targets to 1,000 yards. Anything over 1,000 yards was normally volley fire with the range and the firing commands given by the squad leader or the platoon commander. In some armies, marksmanship training was given little attention. In others, rifle marksmanship was considered to be the primary soldierly quality. The British are a good example of this. They had learned their lesson in the Boer War, and in the early 1900s, their emphasis on marksmanship made them one of the better armies in the world. The U.S. Army also placed great emphasis on individual rifle marksmanship, and numerous marksmanship exchange programs had been engaged in between U.S. and British rifle clubs since the 1870s, and on an official basis between the armies from the 1900s. In fact, the first Wimbledon Cup was a rifle marksmanship award between the two nations. In those nations that did emphasize individual rifle marksmanship, the sling was not simply a carrying strap, as you use today, but served double duty to help stabilize the weapon during firing. The sling on this P-17 is of such a type. The shooter got into it like this. The sling helps steady the rifle prior to and during discharge, help reduce the movement of the weapon during recoil, and help the shooter reacquire the sight picture. This latter can be quite important. The reacquiring of the sight picture after working the bolt frequently took more time than the working of the bolt itself. You can see the advantage of the sling. The British Army in particular conducted a great deal of training on the manipulation of the bolt and reacquisition of the sight picture. We'll show you a P-17 in action against pop-up targets at 3 ranges and against a 4th stationary target at 680 yards. As you watch this, you'll note the shooter make a major error and then correct himself partway through. See if you can spot it. Before we go to the chart and compare the bolt action, what error do you think you spotted? In fact, the error was that when the shooter finished engaging the targets at 330 yards, which was at the edge of his battle sight range, he should have adjusted the sights before engaging the target at 680 yards. He fired his first shot without this adjustment, and the round hit well short. After adjusting the sight, he hit close to the target, though to one side. The wind was very, very heavy on the day that he was firing, and that miss was caused by wind drift. Though not shown on the tape, by the fifth round, he was putting the shots right in there. On the chart, it looks like this. The superiority of the bolt action over the single-shot breech loaders, and we're using the 1873 Springfield as a generic example, is quite obvious. Though the battle sight range on this P-17 was 370 yards, this could vary from one rifle cartridge combination to another to between 320 and 370 yards. The maximum adjust sight range could be 100 or 200 yards less, again depending upon the rifle and cartridge combination. Also remember that 1,000 yards did not represent the maximum distance that the bullet would travel. Firing in volley, effective fire could be delivered at greater ranges. In fact, British rifles before World War I had sight adjustments to 2,600 yards, and they regularly conducted volley fire training out to 1,900 yards. For volume of fire, you can see that the bolt action has roughly double the volume of the single shot. The bolt action's primary advantages in volume of fire are its magazine charging with the stripper clip and the relatively small motions that have to be made in order to reload the rifle. This volume of fire for the bolt action on the chart assumes recovery of the sight picture and taking a few seconds per round to aim precisely at one of the longer range targets. At closer ranges, such as 150 yards or less, where precise sight picture was not all that important, recovery after recoil was much faster, and the volume of fire would frequently go up to 20 rounds per minute. The effect of this drastic increase in both volume of fire and combat range in just a few short years is almost legendary. The trench warfare of World War I was a direct outgrowth of the bolt-action rifle, the water-cooled machine gun, and the new breed of artillery. Though you'll study World War I in great detail, suffice it to say that airplanes, mechanization, radios, and a number of other things had not yet appeared. These would help redress the balance and make the offense equivalent in strength to the defense. Without these things, World War I became stagnant. The no man's land between the two lines was very appropriately named. Moving in the open in no man's land, facing an enemy armed with these bolt-action magazine rifles was risky business indeed.
Friends, stay tuned for more of the Shootin' Show after this break for your local cable company or television station.
You know, Lewis, you like semi-automatic pistols, and you really need one of these Colt 1991s. We've really had good luck with this. By the way, friends, let me introduce our advertising manager to you. This is Mr. Lewis Camback.
Howdy.
And he's in charge. You know, if somebody's got to be dressed up and wear a tie, well,
the advertising man doesn't want to do it.
That's right. I'd rather have the advertising manager do that. But Lewis is, one, he's a nice guy, and two, he's really anxious to work with you folks out there.
Absolutely.
You know, we have a tremendous number of phone calls and people write us letters saying, what can, in fact, you do for our show? Well, let me tell you what, there is something you can do. First of all, if you have a business that is even remotely related to the outdoor industry or to shooting in general, you can give our man Lewis a call, because we need you to advertise on the Shootin' Show.
Absolutely.
Now then, if you do not have a business, you can help us further by writing to any manufacturer of your choice and asking them to please consider advertising on the Shootin' Show.
It works, folks. Your cards and letters work for that sort of thing.
They really do, because you can reach a tremendous number of people. In fact, Lewis, why should someone advertise on the Shootin' Show?
Well, you've got over 1 million loyal customers watching this show, just like yourselves, every single week. Now, you can spend big bucks on advertising in magazines and newspapers, but you can't get the type of customers every week like you can on the Shootin' Show. We're talking a minimal investment, folks, $250 for a 30-second commercial. You can't buy that in a magazine or a newspaper.
Well, you know, over the Super Bowl here recently, a 30-second spot was $850,000. Is that correct?
It's incredible, yeah.
And heck, we reach I think our clientele is more desirable than a lot of those people watching that football game.
Well, it's a loyal clientele, I can tell you that much.
That's right. And you know, folks, we're doing more than just showing guns. We're helping ensure your and our rights to own firearms and enjoy shooting firearms in the future. You know, right now we're blessed with some anti-gun people in the office, in the highest office in the land, in fact, and a number of people from the vice president on down who are really not friendly to us as gun owners. And we've got to reach those people in Congress, and you know what? You can do it through the Shootin' Show.
Absolutely.
Because we can inform viewers to mount letter-writing campaigns, to mount phone calls to their congressman, because that's really where our strength is. You know, Lewis, another point I want to make, a tremendous number of people watch our program who don't read the gun press, who don't read the shooting magazines. And we're anything if we're certainly not against any publication for that matter, because, you know, we work with a number of shooting publications, but we're offering an avenue that many of our manufacturers and suppliers have never had, and that is on television. You know, friends, there are all sorts of outdoor shows, but we are, in fact, as we speak, the only gun show. Someone asked me what kind of TV show we've got. We've got a gun show, and we want to show the safe and reasonable means of shooting in America. Now, Lewis, what if someone out there does not have, say they don't have a TV commercial?
Well, a lot of small businesses don't have TV commercials. They've never advertised on TV because it's way too expensive. They've always been told that. We can do a very low-cost advertising campaign, complete with commercial, for, I'd say, anywhere under $500. You can't do that network TV. You can't do that even on cable television. And Johnny, if they want to, we can even have you on the commercial with
Well,
it.
of course.
And that'd be the way to do it.
Sure. So, friends, Lewis, how can they get in touch with you, our advertising manager, if they want to call you direct?
They can call us on the number on the screen, 318-227-8611. We'll be happy to help you.
And friends, remember now, if you lose that number, well, don't worry about a thing.
Just call the Shootin'
Just
Show
call the
number.
Shootin' Show. We're in information in Shreveport, Louisiana. You know our number, 318-222-8515. And I will personally see to it that Lewis gets that information, because he and his staff are a tremendous help to us now, because a lot of you know that our show has grown so rapidly, and we're so pleased to be working with them, and they're good people.
He's too busy to keep up with it. That's what it's amount to, and so we've taken it over.
So we're so pleased to be working with them. And again, if you want to help the Shootin' Show now, write those letters, make those phone calls to those potential sponsors. The gun companies out there, we're friends with a lot of them, but you know, we can be a lot friendlier, and we need their support, because it's an expensive proposition doing this program each week.
Absolutely. If we don't have your support, then we go off the air.
That's true. And we need those manufacturers in here, so please, if you would, if you want to do something for us, you can write letters or call those manufacturers and suppliers out there and tell them, hey, you folks really ought to be advertising on the Shootin' Show.
Thanks a lot.
Now, friends, this afternoon we're going to shoot an El Presidente drill, which a number of you in the IPSC local club matches certainly are used to doing. But where we are, we're 32 feet 6 inches away from our targets. And for those of you who don't know, Tara here is going to time me. She'll start me off. When the timer goes off, I will draw and turn and shoot each target twice. And then I'll reload with a fresh magazine and shoot the targets again twice for a total of 12 rounds. And today we're using one of the finest guns that I've ever had the privilege of shooting, and this is a Clark modified Norinco, yes, Norinco, 1911 45 ACP. So let's see what it looks like in doing our impromptu El Presidente, shall we say. All right, got my hearing protection in, my gun's ready to go, got spare magazine. All right, put my hands in the surrender position. Okay. Okay, what's our time?
6:03.
Well, that was 6 seconds, 6 300 seconds. And let me tell you what, friends, we'll check my hits in just a moment, but these guns, once Jim Clark gets through working on the 1911, trust me on this one, it works. And we'll talk about this some more in just a moment, but 603, not, hey, for an average shooter, not too shabby. Now then, friends, looking at our targets, I had shooting this tremendous Clark 45. Thankfully, I had pretty good hits. Again, that was a fairly fast time for me, a little over 6 seconds, which, of course, again, my gun is competitive with anybody's match gun anywhere once Jim Clark gets through working on one. Anyway, there's 4 hits here, and fairly well centered, 4 over here, and I got 1 high over here, but we got 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is not too shabby for just us playing around out here this afternoon. Not too shabby, a target group. Now, friends, what you see here is this tremendous Clark Norinco 45 ACP. This is the Norinco 1911. A lot of you will remember last year we first tested this gun on our program, and to tell you the truth, none of us knew really what the quality of the metal was or anything else. We just didn't know. Anytime you have a gun built in a foreign country that you're not familiar with, even though Norinco builds some very fine rifles, to tell you the truth, we didn't know about their handguns. So what we have done is we took our Norinco 45 down to, of course, one of the finest gunsmiths in the world, one of the finest shops that deals in pistol smithing in the world, Jim Clark, down in Keithville, Louisiana. And they're good friends of ours, and they're very fine people. But you know what? This is the proof in the pudding. This gun right here is as fine a competition 45 as money can buy. Now then, we're not recommending that you take your Colt in, such as our great 1991 A1 right here. We're not saying go trade in your Colt if you've already got a Colt, but the Norinco 45s, if you don't have maybe quite as much money to spend, it's an awfully good gun to start with. If you want a 45 automatic, you can go and get one of these Norinco guns for a lot less money, and it makes a very fine gun to start with for an action shooting or an IPSC competition type gun. This particular gun, the way the Clarks have modified it, let me show you a couple of things they've done. They have replaced the sights with much easier to see a front sight and a rear sight. And personally, I like fixed sights like on a 45 automatic, because if you drop it or whatever else, you're not going to hurt them. So we have some Wilson fixed sights on the rear here, and of course the front sight is the Clark process. They literally cut a slot out in the slide, and then they fit a completely different front sight. And friends, let me tell you what, you can shoot them and these don't come off. They're just tremendous. Another thing they've done to this gun, they have accurized it, and they have fitted a different trigger.
Now, friends, you see the group the gun shot as factory stock. It was a 10-inch group for 10 shots from a machine rest at 50 yards. Now let's look and see how the gun shoots after the Clark accuracy job. Now, friends, you're looking at a 2.5-inch group from the factory barrel at 50 yards from a machine rest after the Clark accuracy job. Now, friends, we're going to shoot some steel targets with our Clark modified Norinco out at 75 yards.
There's one.
Okay, friends, I tell you what, like I said, we would normally do that at 75 yards.
But believe me, it's a lot easier with a Clark custom gun. And friends, we want to remind you about Shotgun News, the trading post for anything that shoots, published 3 times monthly. Shotgun News, Post Office Box 669, Hastings, Nebraska. The zip is 68902. Their phone number is area 402-463-4589. MasterCard or Visa, subscriptions only, 1-800-345-6923. Now, friends, if you want to get the best shooting magazine in existence, please pick up Shooting Times magazine. For subscription information, call 1-800-727-4353. For all your shooting needs, if you're in the Arklatex area, come to Britain's Gun Shop, 517 Louisiana Avenue, Shreveport, Louisiana. The zip is 71101. Their phone number is area 318-221-4131. Now, friends, we hope you've enjoyed this week's edition of the Shootin' Show, and we look forward to coming back to your house again next week. So until then, we'll see you next week.